Before I do, I wanted to make a comment. There's food in the area there, and I wanted to suggest to everyone that that food is meant to be for members of Parliament only. I'm mentioning it because in the last meeting, one of our members who had a special dietary requirement couldn't get it when he came to get food because somebody who is not an MP had eaten it. So I would ask anyone in the room who are not MPs to please, you may have coffee and you may have juice, but please do not eat the food that is meant for MPs. Thank you very much.
Free speech means the right to be free from government limits on speech. If governments did nothing, we would have free speech. But nevertheless, the government's going to say you're not allowed to say that. Now you're into dangerous territory in which freedom of speech is actually not being observed.
Everyone has an opinion about Canadian federal politics.
Oh, yeah.
Hey gang, what's up? Aaron right here, Canadian Loony. I don't know who is the worst chair of any of these committees. Every time I see Lena Diab, I think she's the worst. Right there we see Heidi Fry talking with her mouth full, telling people not to eat the food. Ridiculous. She's always out of hand. This is a very interesting committee meeting though. We've got Professor Bruce Pardy, who is going to explain what free speech really is and the role the government should play in that. Let's take a look and a listen. We've got Damien Kirk in this one, JIVANI. This gentleman, Professor Bruce Pardy, is very interesting. He has an interesting take. I don't think the Liberals are going to like this witness at all. The Conservatives will, though. Let's take a look. Professor Bruce Pardy, testifying to committee.
Again, Professor, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Your committee is studying how the government should protect free speech. This seems to me to be quite a strange question for you to be studying, because the answer seems obvious. And also because for years, the federal government has been doing the opposite. Free speech is a right we hold against government. Free speech means the right to be free from government limits on speech. If governments did nothing, we would have free speech. Governments protect free speech by getting out of the way. Therefore, if you want to protect free speech, stop limiting speech. Defeat Bill C-63, the Online Harms Act. Repeal Bill C-18, the Online News Act. Repeal Bill C-11, the Online Streaming Act. Repeal the gender amendments to the Canadian Human Rights Act in the old Bill C-16, and so on. If you want to protect free speech, stop limiting speech. As Winston Churchill put it, there is nothing government can give to you that it hasn't taken from you in the first place.
May I point out that the study is not on freedom of speech, the study is on freedom of expression. So I just wanted to remind you of that.
Yes, thank
Professor
you. Free
Pardy.
speech. Thank you, Madam Chair. Free speech and freedom of expression are essentially the same thing in the law. I am using free speech to mean freedom of expression. We have freedom of expression because we are free people. And for no other reason. Speech is free not only if it is beneficial or is in the public good, not only if it serves democracy, or if it helps to discover truth in a marketplace of ideas. You have a right to express your thoughts, whatever they are, for the sole reason that your thoughts are yours. If you are free, you are allowed to hate other people, and you are allowed to say that you do. If you are free, you are allowed to vilify and detest, to discredit, to disrespect, to discriminate, to speak falsehoods, and to spread lies, if you are free. Now, of course, free speech is not absolute. What are the limits to be imposed upon speech and still call it free? Well, other people are free too. That means that you can't coerce them. You can't threaten them with imminent violence or counsel a crime. You can't defame. You can't harass. You can't defraud. You can't release private information that you don't own. These limits make sense because they protect the liberty of other people, the same liberty that provides you with the right to free speech in the first place. But that's about as far as it goes, if you want to claim to have free speech. So by all means, Madam Chair, protect free speech. Do it by getting the government out of the business of supervising speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor.
So in this round, we're going to have JIVANI, one of my favorite MPs to watch. He might be the next Attorney General. I think Larry Brock probably has that position locked up, but JIVANI, although young and without a lot of experience in Parliament, he is sharp as a tack. These Conservatives are going to love this witness. The Liberals, not so much. Haiti Fry does try to get in the way. Let's take a look.
For 5 minutes. Okay, Mr. JIVANI, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to direct my questions to Mr. Pardy. Mr. Pardy, I think what we've seen sort of on display in some of the comments made today at this meeting is a certain logic that has informed the legislation that you've referenced, Bill C-11, C-18, C-63. And that logic seems to be people pointing to problems in society, suggesting that the expansion of the federal bureaucracy is somehow the necessary solution to those problems, not really making a case for the efficacy of that bureaucracy, but nonetheless saying that the bureaucracy must grow and that the Canadian taxpayer must pay for that growth. I'd like for you to speak to your concerns related to the expansion of the federal bureaucracy, and in particular, I'm referencing some of your writing on the growth of the administrative state.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that question. I agree with the premise of your question 100%. We have mangled the idea of rights, such as those in the Charter of Rights. They are supposed to be negative rights, meaning that they are rights against government interference. If the government does not interfere with you, then your rights are being observed. And we have this idea in this country that there are rights that we need the government's help to achieve. We need the government to intervene in this, to impose on that. This group asks for the government to make that group stop saying things about this group because that's not right. That's not the conception of rights that we were supposed to have. The conception we're supposed to have is if the government leaves you alone, then your rights are being observed. It is when the government intervenes that is the problem. And you can see that reflected in the comments and the submissions here. But yes, to your larger point, we have a government that has grown beyond its useful limits. The public sector, by some estimates, I saw the other day an estimate that said that the public sector has grown to 40% of the economy of this country. Okay, that is not sustainable. That is one of the reasons that this country is becoming poor. You need more people than that in the public, in the private sector, to make it possible to have a government. We think that money grows on trees, and that the government is the solution to everything. And we're in that trap so deep that we cannot see anything else. That whenever there's a problem, that the only possible solution is more, not less, government programs, rules, taxes, structures. Sometimes, if not always, in this day and age, the solution is less, not more.
This in our broader conversation about freedom of expression, how would you articulate to, the average Canadian citizen why hearing people in Ottawa talk so cavalierly about expanding the footprint of the state may be a danger to people being free to articulate themselves, particularly
actual revolution or anything? This is just it's the way public authorities spread their influence. It happens over time. We have had an administrative state for many, many years, but it's now as big as it has ever been. And by the way, the administrative state is not provided for in our Constitution. It's not prohibited, but it's not provided for. And so the fundamental ideas like the separation of powers between legislature and executive and courts now has been more or less practically been put by the wayside. And the bureaucracy now more or less runs the show. And if you think that you live in a free country and the bureaucracy actually runs the show, then you're mistaken. The greatest threat to our liberty now is the administrative state.
There's a line you wrote in an article for the National Post that I'd like to ask you to elaborate on, where you wrote, "We trusted that these institutions," and in institutions you're referring in part to the administrative state, "would commit to their own restraint. We have been tragically naive." Can you comment on what restraint means in this context? And again, for the purposes of the freedom of expression, why people need to be concerned about trusting the administrative state to be restrained in its use of power?
Thank you, Mr. JIVANI. I'm glad you came back to the topic at hand, and because we were moving away from it.
The entire
Good.
time, actually.
Okay, please, I'll ask the witness to stick to the topic at hand. Thank you.
We've been talking about the topic at hand. You're wrong.
Please, can you go ahead and answer the question?
You're editorializing.
Yeah. So the rule of law is an idea, and the idea is that the state is restrained in all kinds of ways, including the way it restrains our speech. But the rule of law depends upon the people in charge believing in the idea. And now they don't. Now they don't believe the state should be restrained. Now they think the solution to everything is the state. And so when you have conflicts between people who disagree, they both want the state to intervene and make the other guy stop speaking. And
Thank you very much. We have gone a minute over time, Mr. JIVANI.
So we have Professor Pardy blatantly stating that these bills are in no interest for Canadians. This legislation just won't do. Anyhow, Damien KUREK, another one of our favorites here, has more questions for Professor Pardy, who is only telling it like it is. Free speech is not something that the government should be controlling. If it's free speech, what do we need control for? Bill C-63? That doesn't sound like freedom of speech to me. Makes me nervous. Anyhow, Damien KUREK, really sharp, great questions. Let's go.
For the Conservatives, Mr. KUREK, for 6 minutes, please. Damien.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Pardy, there was a bit of an exchange during your opening statement that talked about if there's a difference between freedom of expression and freedom of speech. And I know in the Charter it does talk about expression, but the outline of what that means for speech. So I'm wondering if you could unpack a little bit about what freedom of speech is in Canada and the reflections of what that means in the context of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Sure, yes, thank you for the question. So just on the terms, yes, the Charter uses the term freedom of expression, and that's that is the proper legal term, but free speech is basically a shorthand for that. Now, expression includes more than speech. I mean, the clothes that you wear on your back could be a form of expression. But the two terms are essentially used synonymously when you're talking in this kind of a context. That right in the Charter has been interpreted by the Supreme Court in a, I would say, a utilitarian way, which is unfortunate. So what I mean by that is, and I alluded to this in my statement, the Supreme Court has tended to say that free speech is free when it is useful to society. And that, of course, means that it's not really free speech at all, because the right of free speech, like all charter rights, essentially, are supposed to act as a space for individuals to resist the interests of the group in the form of the government. And so if it is allowed that we infringe on these rights because the group wants to, then they're not really functioning as rights at all. They're functioning as something else, as a means to establish a collective interest. And so I think we have the wrong end of the stick in that sense in this country about what our charter rights mean, and in particular, the right to free speech.
So if I could follow up on that, because we often hear about what the limits of free speech are in the context of the Charter as well. So I'm wondering if you could expand on that a little bit, because that's often used, as I would suggest, a justification to silence free speech, because there is the interpretation of that section of the Charter that does that's often used by government in different ways. So could you expand on what limitations are reasonable versus not? Yes,
sure. So but here's the irony, right? So your mandate seems to be to inquire into protecting freedom of expression. And the asks that I'm hearing are all about governments doing things or subsidizing things or creating more rules and creating more restrictions. Those things are the opposite of free speech. If you want free speech, as I alluded to, have government out of it. That's what it means. If you're asking for government to intervene, you're talking about something else altogether. And so, again, we have this upside down.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
So and I apologize. Time is short, but I do just want to nail down one of the aspects of Bill C-63 is that it changes the definition of hate speech, and that moves it from the current objective measure that is, causing violence or harm to could be things that involve things like offense or the feeling of hurt. So I'm wondering if you could just unpack that a little bit in about a minute, and then I have one follow-up question I want to make sure I get in before the 6 minutes is up.
Sure. Well, in the text of C-63, they have tried to draw a line between hate speech on the one side and offensive speech on the other, saying offensive speech is okay, but hate speech is not okay. And that sounds reasonable, right? But of course, nobody knows where the line is. And so if you are speaking in a way that some people would regard as offensive, there is no guarantee whatsoever that on a particular occasion, a tribunal or a court is going to say, well, no, that is hate speech and you're liable. Okay. So as soon as you go down the road of deciding that you're not allowed to say things that don't violate anybody else's rights, like you're not threatening violence, but nevertheless, the government's going to say you're not allowed to say that. Now you're into dangerous territory in which freedom of speech is actually not being observed.
Thank you. And in about the minute that I have left, a common topic of conversation before this committee has been Bill C-11 and Bill C-18, the Online News Act and the Online Streaming Act. In about 45 seconds, I'm wondering if you could share your opinion of those two bills with the committee.
Yeah, these are terrible pieces of legislation. They are interfering with both the speech but also the listening of Canadians. And so you can think in some context of freedom of expression as an exchange between speaker and audience. And both have the right to conduct the exchange, the speaker to speak, the audience to listen. And what these two bills do is they give powers to administrators and bureaucrats and offices to interfere in that exchange and to dictate to Canadians what it is they can access and listen to online. They are terrible pieces of legislation.
15 seconds? 12?
That's the answer. Sorry.
Yeah, and I don't think I have time to get another.
Okay, that's good. Thank you very much.
Repeal the bills.
Thank you.
Madam Speaker, if I can.
Yes.
I think it's been agreed amongst the parties, at least here, that we do cut short today's meeting. And I know we have 2 or 3 of the groups of the 6 that have appeared here today that have to go very shortly. So I'm just flagging it for you, the analysts and the clerk. And then as far as the CBC, we're fine just submitting email to you on the plans on the CBC.
On the CBC report?
Yes.
We have a very tight line to report back to
Yep.
the House. And I want to remind the committee that if we do not report back to the House by the
Yep.
deadline, this committee is in violation of the law, of
Yep.
the motion, and we are in contempt of Parliament. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, just reminding you of that. Now, if people know...
It is always fun when we get a witness that does like cooperating with real Canadian patriots. This Professor Pardy seems to be one of those and has a tighter grip on what free speech and the role of the government should be in such a thing. All these liberals are trying to do is take away free speech, it would seem. Bill C-63, guys, to a guy like me, seems like the devil. Who knows? Aaron, Canadian Looney, like, share, subscribe. We know a little bit more after watching one more committee meeting. Heidi Fry likes to eat with her mouth open and then tell other people not to eat food. That's what you get with these liberals. Aaron, Canadian Looney, like, share, subscribe. We'll catch you in the next video. Thank you for watching this one. Catch you next time. Everyone has an opinion about Canadian federal politics.